The air was thick with the scent of burning metal and scorched earth as the skies above Earth erupted with the flashes of weapons fire. The Galactic Empire had arrived. Their vast fleets, each one the size of a small moon, hovered in low orbit, blocking out the sun. On the ground, humanity's last line of defense crumbled, the brave soldiers of Earth overwhelmed by the might of a superior enemy. Cities once bustling with life now lay in ruins, reduced to rubble by orbital bombardments and ruthless ground assaults. Captain Aiden Stark stood at the heart of the battlefield, watching as the last of Earth's fighters made their final stand. His boots were caked with dirt, blood, and ash, but his expression remained unwavering, cold as steel. He had witnessed the fall of every major city: London, New York, Paris, each one burning like a dying star. But despite the losses, Aiden never faltered. The Empire's war machines, towering mechanized soldiers, and massive warships, advanced unrelentingly. Each step they took crushed the resistance beneath their heels. Humanity's advanced weaponry, once the pride of Earth's military, now felt like toys against the Empire's unyielding power. The invaders didn't even seem to break a sweat as they crushed the planet's defenses, destroying the last vestiges of resistance with effortless brutality. Aiden's eyes narrowed as he watched the Imperial flagship, the Dominion, descending slowly from the clouds, casting a dark shadow over the ruins of the battlefield. The Empire's flagship was a thing of nightmares, a gargantuan vessel capable of laying waste to entire continents with a single shot. He could hear the distant rumble of its weapons as they unleashed another round of destruction. But even with Earth on the brink of collapse, Aiden refused to surrender. He wasn't going to let the galaxy forget humanity's resilience. There were still pockets of soldiers and civilians fighting, still a chance to turn the tide. Aiden's last mission was clear: lead one final strike to push back the Empire, to avenge the millions lost, and to prove that humanity, no matter how small in number, would not bow to tyranny. Aiden activated his comms, his voice cold and commanding. All remaining forces, fall back to the extraction point. This is not our end. We fight another day. He had led his people for years, but now, the reality of defeat settled in his chest. Earth would fall. He knew it, and the rest of humanity knew it. But Aiden Stark would not die in vain. He would not be the last warrior to stand on Earth's soil without taking a piece of the Empire with him. As the last remnants of the human defense retreated, Aiden made his way to the command center. The massive structure had been decimated by artillery fire, its walls cracked and scorched. The air was thick with smoke and the stench of burning flesh. The sound of distant explosions echoed, but Aiden's mind was focused on one goal: survival. He was Earth's last hope, and even if the planet was lost, he would carry humanity's fight into the stars. He turned away from the shattered cityscape, his jaw set with determination. He would escape, but not alone. There were others out there, survivors. And the war, as far as he was concerned, was far from over. As the last remaining dropships lifted into the smoke-choked skies, Aiden Stark's resolve solidified. The Empire may have destroyed Earth, but humanity's fight was just beginning. The galaxy had moved on. In the years that followed Earth's fall, the Galactic Empire expanded its grip, enslaving countless worlds, extinguishing any flicker of rebellion with overwhelming force. Earth was little more than a distant memory, a forgotten casualty in the ever-growing expansion of the Empire. But even as the Empire's grip tightened, rumors began to spread, whispers in the shadows of the galaxy, of a lone warrior, a human, still alive. No one knew where he had gone after the destruction of Earth, but stories surfaced of Imperial outposts being mysteriously destroyed, of entire convoys being ambushed and wiped out by a single figure, always a human, always a shadow in the night. The Empire's upper brass dismissed it as mere propaganda, a myth designed to rally resistance. But as the attacks grew more frequent, more precise, they could no longer ignore the possibility that something or someone was out there. Aiden Stark was no longer just a name. He had become a legend. The first official report came from a small Imperial supply station in the Outer Rim. The station had been critical in providing arms to the Empire's war effort, but one night it vanished without a trace. When Imperial scouts arrived, the station was in ruins, and the only clue left behind was a series of destroyed security droids, each with a single slash mark across their chests. The attacker's signature, sharp, precise, and terrifyingly human. By the time the Empire had coordinated a response, it was already too late. The next attack came a few weeks later, a sudden and ruthless assault on a weapons depot in the Chorus system. The depot was heavily fortified, guarded by elite Imperial troops and state-of-the-art drones. Yet, in the dead of night, Aiden slipped in unnoticed. When the dust settled, every soldier was dead, every weapon sabotaged, and the only evidence left behind was a single blood-stained human insignia carved into a wall, the last human. From that moment on, Aiden Stark was more than a ghost. He was a symbol of defiance, of rebellion, of humanity's refusal to be erased from the universe. The Empire scrambled to find answers, sending fleets of bounty hunters, mercenaries, and even specialized Imperial squads to track him down. But Aiden was always one step ahead, blending in with the galaxy's dark corners, a phantom that no one could capture. In the slums of Coruscant, the capital world of the Empire, a street vendor muttered to himself as he packed his goods away for the night. "They say the human's coming. He's alive." A few blocks away, a group of former Imperial soldiers turned mercenaries overheard the conversation. One scoffed, "The last human. Just another story to sell to the gullible. I don't believe in fairy tales." But the others, wary and silent, exchanged nervous glances. There was a wariness in their eyes that came from something more than disbelief. Over time, Aiden's name spread like wildfire. He was a symbol to the oppressed that still believed they could rise against the Empire, and a nightmare to the Empire itself, whose forces grew more paranoid by the day. His strikes were calculated and precise, hitting only the most vulnerable targets, undermining Imperial supply chains, and forcing the Empire to divert its resources away from conquest and towards hunting down a single human. Each victory was a silent battle cry, a promise that no matter how vast the Empire's power, humanity's will could never be extinguished. Every day, Aiden's legend grew, and with it, so did the hope of the galaxy's inhabitants. Aiden, however, never reveled in the glory. His mission was simple: to continue the fight. He wasn't a hero, he was a warrior. The galaxy had forgotten humanity's strength, and he intended to remind them, one strike at a time. But he also knew that time was running out. The Empire would find him eventually, and when they did, they would send everything they had. For now, though, Aiden remained a ghost. But even the dead can leave their mark. The whispers about the last human grew louder. No longer could the Empire dismiss Aiden Stark as a mere ghost story. His actions, though elusive, were undeniable. The attacks on Imperial assets continued, each one bolder than the last. It was clear that a single human was responsible, one man who had become an unstoppable force of rebellion in a galaxy that was supposed to be under the Empire's absolute control. And with each passing day, the galaxy trembled in fear of what he might do next. The Empire, growing increasingly desperate, decided that enough was enough. They would no longer let a single human challenge their rule. Emperor Varric, the cold and calculating leader of the Empire, convened a meeting of his highest commanders. Aiden Stark's name echoed through the grand halls of the Imperial Palace as Varric's deep voice resonated with fury. "Bring me this human," the Emperor commanded. "I want him alive." To do so, the Empire pulled out all the stops. They dispatched a cadre of bounty hunters, each one more ruthless and skilled than the last. Some were human, others alien, but all shared one thing in common. They were the galaxy's deadliest assassins. Their mission was clear: hunt down the elusive warrior and bring him to the Emperor, no matter the cost. On the fringes of the galaxy, Aiden had become something of a ghost. He moved swiftly, striking in the shadows, vanishing before any reinforcements could arrive. But as the Empire grew more focused, so did their efforts. Bounty hunters combed the outer rim, infiltrated planets, and questioned every alien who had crossed paths with the mysterious figure. The hunt for Aiden Stark had begun in earnest, and the noose was tightening. Aiden felt the shift in the air. The Empire's response was getting too coordinated, too determined. He knew they were close. His strikes had always been calculated, always on his terms, but now the Empire was making it harder to stay hidden. It wasn't just bounty hunters after him anymore. Entire Imperial task forces were deployed, sweeping systems clean of any trace of him. They were closing in. In a hidden cave on the moon of Larnus, Aiden and his growing band of rebels gathered, preparing for their next move. His ally, Sara, a former high-ranking Imperial officer who had defected after witnessing Aiden's heroism, stood by his side. She was an expert in Imperial tactics, and her insights had made their strikes more effective. But even she could sense the growing pressure. "We need to move faster," she said, her voice tense. "The Empire is not just looking for you anymore. They're targeting anything they think might be connected to you. You're a symbol now, Aiden. They'll burn the galaxy to find you." Aiden clenched his jaw. "Then let them burn. I won't stop until I've made them pay for what they've done. We're hitting them where it hurts. Supply lines, communication hubs, weapon caches. Every victory gives the galaxy hope, and every hit weakens their grip." Sara nodded but couldn't shake the unease gnawing at her. "You're too valuable to this fight, Aiden. You can't keep going like this forever. The Empire won't stop until they've crushed you." Aiden's gaze was cold, determined. "Then I'll make them regret it." But deep down, even he knew Sara was right. The Empire's response had grown too aggressive. It wouldn't be long before they cornered him. And when they did, he would have to be ready. Days passed, and the pressure mounted. Aiden's small fleet of rebels was barely managing to keep one step ahead of the Empire's relentless pursuit. The Empire had begun to hunt more methodically, closing in on every suspected location Aiden might hide. Every system he visited, every planet he touched, became a battleground. No matter where he went, the shadow of the Empire followed. As the first wave of bounty hunters closed in on his position, Aiden made a decision. He wouldn't run anymore. The time for hiding was over. "I'll give them a reason to fear us," Aiden said, voice resolute. "We're taking the fight to their doorstep. Every Imperial officer, every soldier, every bounty hunter who stands in our way will learn what it means to face the last human warrior." The rebels, now bolstered by the hope Aiden had ignited across the galaxy, rallied behind him. They would make the Empire regret ever underestimating the human spirit. The Empire had started this war, but Aiden Stark would finish it. And the galaxy would soon learn that the last human wasn't just a survivor. He was a force of nature. Aiden Stark had become more than just the last human warrior. He had become a symbol. Across the galaxy, whispers of his victory spread like wildfire. The oppressed, the downtrodden, and the disenfranchised, the countless species subjugated by the Galactic Empire, began to rally behind him. The Empire's oppressive rule had lasted for decades, but now, for the first time in years, it seemed that hope might be within reach. And it was all thanks to one man's defiance. But as Aiden's legend grew, so too did the challenges. He had no official army, no fleet of warships. All he had were a handful of rebels, freedom fighters from different worlds united by a common cause: the destruction of the Empire. They were poorly equipped and often outgunned, but they shared one thing. They had nothing left to lose. Aiden had given them a purpose, a reason to fight. The first major operation came when Aiden's group attacked an Imperial convoy, carrying vital resources to one of the Empire's core worlds. The mission was simple: cut off the supplies and cripple the Empire's military. But the plan quickly escalated. Aiden, ever the strategist, saw an opportunity to strike directly at the Empire's leadership. They had intelligence about a key Imperial commander traveling with the convoy, someone who could give the rebels critical information about Imperial movements and strategy. If they could capture him, the blow to the Empire's command structure would be devastating. Aiden's team, led by Xara, infiltrated the convoy under the cover of darkness. It was a daring mission, one that risked everything. As they advanced, the rebels engaged Imperial forces in guerrilla skirmishes, drawing attention away from their true target. It was a battle of wits as much as it was of strength. Aiden and his team worked in perfect coordination, executing each move with deadly precision. As the convoy neared the outskirts of a desolate moon, Aiden's team struck. The ambush was brutal and swift. Explosions rocked the convoy, disabling vehicles and creating chaos. Amid the confusion, Aiden's objective was clear: capture the commander alive. He had no intention of killing him, not yet. They needed him for the information he held. The battle was fierce, but Aiden's rebels fought with a desperation born from years of oppression. They knew they couldn't afford to fail. After intense combat, they managed to capture the commander, a high-ranking officer named Colonel Alaric Voss. The battle had cost them, but they had succeeded. With the officer in custody, Aiden had to make a critical decision: what to do with Voss. The commander was no fool. He knew the rebels were no match for the Empire's full might. He wasn't going to be an easy ally. But Aiden, ever the pragmatist, saw an opportunity. He sat Voss down, face to face in the makeshift command center, and offered him a choice. Help us. Share your knowledge, and you'll live. Fight against us, and you'll die along with the Empire you serve. Voss's eyes flickered with doubt. He had seen the destruction the Empire had wrought, but his loyalty ran deep. Still, as he looked into the eyes of the man who had single-handedly crippled the might of the Empire, he felt a shift. The truth was undeniable. The Empire was collapsing. The question was not if, but when. "You think you can bring down the Empire?" Voss asked, his voice laced with skepticism. "I don't think." Aiden replied coldly. "I know. The Empire is a dying beast, and I'm the one who will finish it off." Voss looked away, conflicted, but in the silence that followed, he knew the rebellion had already won in one way. Aiden Stark had proven that the Empire was not invincible. And that thought, the seed of doubt, grew within him. "I'll help you," Voss said at last, his voice quieter, resigned. "But be warned, if the Emperor learns what I've done, he will burn everything to the ground." "That's why we need you," Aiden said with grim determination, "to make sure he doesn't get the chance." The capture of Colonel Voss was a turning point. It wasn't just a victory. It was a message to the entire galaxy. The Empire, despite its immense power, was vulnerable. The chains that had held the galaxy in fear for so long could be broken, one by one. And the first crack in the Empire's armor had been made by a human, a single warrior who had refused to give up. Now, with the commander's information, Aiden and his rebels knew where to strike next. The heart of the Empire was vulnerable, and the time had come for them to attack. The galaxy's future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: the Empire was no longer invincible. Aiden Stark had ignited a revolution, and there was no turning back. With Colonel Voss's information in hand, Aiden Stark and his ragtag group of rebels knew their next move had to be calculated and decisive. The intelligence they gathered pointed them toward one of the most heavily fortified systems in the galaxy, the Imperial capital, Coral, a world surrounded by countless fleets, space stations, and defenses. This was where the heart of the Empire pulsed, the central hub from which Emperor Varric controlled his dominion. The galaxy had long lived under the iron fist of the Empire, and now Aiden was planning to strike directly at its core. The stakes had never been higher. If they succeeded, they would cripple the Empire's ability to wage war. But failure would mean the end of everything they had fought for. Aiden sat in the dim light of the briefing room, the worn metal walls around him echoing the tension in the air. The mood was heavy, and each rebel leader knew this mission could very well be their last. "We're taking the fight to Coral," Aiden announced, his voice cold and resolute. The map of the capital system flickered on the screen in front of them. "This is where the Empire's power originates. If we can disrupt their command network, take down their central hub, we'll cripple their entire war effort. They'll have no choice but to turn their attention inward, fighting a war on their own doorstep." Zara, standing at his side, nodded. "The defenses are formidable. They'll throw everything they've got at us, but we know their weak points now. Thanks to Voz, we have access to their internal communication networks. If we can infiltrate their central command station, we can sever their communication lines to the entire fleet." Aiden's gaze hardened. "We won't be just disrupting their command. We're going to make them feel the loss of control. We're going to send a message. No matter how powerful you are, you can still be brought down." As the rebels prepared to launch their attack, Aiden's team grew anxious. They had managed to evade the Empire for years, but now they were walking straight into its heart. Coral was a fortress, and the risk of failure loomed large. Yet the thought of the millions who still lived under Imperial oppression spurred them on. The plan was set. A small, fast assault force would slip through the defenses of Coral's outer rim, using a series of smuggler routes and hidden safe houses to make their way into the planet's heavily guarded capital. Once inside, they would split into two teams, one to target the central command center, and the other to disable the Empire's weapons and shield systems, making it easier for the rest of the rebellion to join the fight. Aiden knew that in war, the best strategy was often the simplest. Strike hard, strike fast, and never give the enemy a chance to breathe. But Coral wasn't like the previous systems they had attacked. The capital was the nerve center of the Empire. Its defenses were more advanced than anything the rebels had faced before. They would have to move fast, hit hard, and leave no trace. "Prepare yourselves," Aiden said, addressing his team. "We might not make it back from this, but if we do, the Empire will never recover. We will show them that the galaxy can fight back, no matter how dark things seem." The next several hours were a blur of final preparations. Ships readied, weapons checked, and everyone bracing for the battle ahead. The rebels had no illusions about the danger they faced, but there was no turning back. The battle for the future of the galaxy was about to begin. As the assault fleet slipped through the outskirts of the Coral system, Aiden's mind raced. The planet below was a symbol of everything the Empire stood for: its military might, its cold oppression, its unyielding control. But it was also the key to ending it all. This was the Empire's nerve center, and Aiden was determined to sever it. If they could bring down Coral, they could take down the rest of the Empire's vast network, starting a chain reaction that would spread across the galaxy. The first wave of the attack went off without a hitch. The rebels, moving with surgical precision, infiltrated the outskirts of Coral's atmosphere and took out the first line of defense, slipping past the Imperial patrols unnoticed. But as they descended into the heart of the city, things began to unravel. A sudden surge of Imperial forces blocked their path, and before they knew it, they were embroiled in a brutal firefight. The streets of Coral's capital exploding in chaos. Aiden was at the front, leading the charge. His blaster fired without pause, cutting through the storm of enemy fire. His heart raced as the reality of the battle sank in. This was no longer a hit-and-run mission. The Empire knew they were coming, and they were ready. The ground beneath him trembled as explosions rocked the city, signaling that the Empire was mobilizing every resource they had to repel the invasion. "We've broken through their defenses," Aiden shouted to his team over the comms. "Stay focused. Our target is the command center. Push forward." As they made their way deeper into the capital, the rebels found themselves in a race against time. The Empire was throwing everything at them, but the rebels had one advantage. They were fueled by something the Empire had long forgotten: hope. And with each passing minute, that hope burned brighter. But as Aiden's team neared the command center, an unexpected twist loomed ahead. The full might of the Imperial forces had now turned their attention to the heart of the rebellion. The streets of Coral's capital were alive with chaos. Explosions tore through the air, fire and smoke rising from the shattered remains of Imperial vehicles and structures. Aiden Stark's rebels pushed forward, every step harder than the last. The Empire's forces had been mobilized in full force, but the human spirit that drove Aiden and his team was unwavering. They were no longer just fighting for survival, they were fighting for freedom, for every soul under the Empire's crushing thumb. Aiden and Sarah fought side by side, cutting through wave after wave of Imperial soldiers. The streets, once pristine and orderly, now echoed with the sounds of battle. Blaster fire, the crack of shattered glass, and the thunderous booms of grenades. Despite their determination, they knew this wasn't a battle they could win easily. The Empire's reinforcements were arriving faster than they had anticipated. "We need to move quicker," Sarah shouted, ducking behind a fallen pillar as a barrage of enemy fire rained down on them. She popped up long enough to return fire, picking off an Imperial officer in the distance. "We're not going to last much longer out here if we don't get to the command center soon." Aiden nodded grimly. "We don't have a choice. We push forward, no matter the cost. If we can take out the command center, we've won." The rebels were getting closer, but the enemy was relentless. They had breached the city's outskirts, but the heart of Coral, where the central command station stood, was heavily fortified. It was surrounded by Imperial armored battalions, shield generators, and towering walls that made it seem impenetrable. But Aiden had a plan. He wasn't here just to fight. He was here to break the Empire's back. "Sarah, take the east flank with Tyke. I'll lead the west side. We'll hit them from both directions. The sooner we get inside, the sooner we stop their communications," Aiden ordered. His voice was steady, but inside, his heart raced. They were on the verge of something monumental, and he couldn't afford to hesitate now. "Understood," Sarah responded, her eyes locking onto his. There was no need for more words. Each of them knew their role. The rebellion had been forged through countless battles, and now it was time to make it count. With his squad of rebels, Aiden pushed forward, using every piece of terrain and cover they could find. The Empire had underestimated them at every turn, but now, with the central command station within reach, Aiden could almost taste victory. Yet, every step felt heavier, each moment of progress a risk. The closer they got, the more dangerous the battle became. As they neared the command center's outer perimeter, Aiden's comm crackled. It was Tyke, one of his most trusted fighters, his voice strained but filled with urgency. "Aiden, we've got a problem. They're bringing in reinforcements, high-level Imperial operatives, the kind we've never faced before. They've got combat exosuits and thermal cannons. We won't be able to hold them off much longer without backup." The news hit like a blow. The operatives Tyke spoke of were the Empire's elite forces, genetically enhanced soldiers equipped with the latest in battle technology. They were the Empire's answer to threats like Aiden. And now, it seemed, they were coming for him. "I'm not running, Tyke. We don't stop. Tell everyone to dig in. We'll fight them here, on our terms," Aiden growled. "They're coming for us, but they're going to learn the hard way that we're not like anything they've faced before." The rebels regrouped quickly, forming defensive lines. Aiden's heart pounded in his chest as he spotted the first of the enhanced soldiers emerging from the smoke. They were towering figures, armored head to toe, their weapons glowing with deadly energy. The odds had never seemed worse, yet Aiden felt an odd calm settle over him. He had faced impossible odds before, and somehow he had always found a way to win. As the first wave of enhanced soldiers charged, Aiden ordered his team to engage, each blast from his blaster sending shockwaves through the air. But despite their efforts, the exosuit soldiers seemed unstoppable. For every soldier they took down, two more appeared in their place, It was a brutal, intense battle, and Aiden knew it couldn't last forever. Just as the situation seemed dire, Sarah and her team arrived, cutting through the enemy lines from the east. Their arrival shifted the momentum. Now the two rebel squads were fighting as one, moving with the precision and coordination of seasoned warriors. But it wasn't enough to overwhelm the enhanced soldiers. They were being pushed back, cornered, and Aiden knew they had to change their approach. In that moment, a thought struck him. They weren't fighting to survive anymore. They were fighting to win. Sarah, Tyke, fall back. I've got an idea. Aiden called over the comm, a new plan forming in his mind. The rebels retreated strategically, drawing the Empire's elite soldiers deeper into a narrow alley. It was risky, but Aiden knew their best chance was using the environment to their advantage. Once the soldiers followed them into the trap, he hit the signal. Explosive charges planted along the alley's walls detonated in quick succession, the blast forcing the Imperial operatives into disarray. "We've got them," Aiden shouted as the dust settled, the enhanced soldiers stunned and disoriented. "Push forward. Take the command center now." With the Empire's elite forces reeling, Aiden's rebels surged forward, storming the final stretch toward the heart of the command station. The Empire had no idea what hit them. The tide had turned, and for the first time, the rebels had a fighting chance. The central command station loomed ahead, its towering spires of steel and glass piercing the smoke-choked sky. Aiden and his rebels had fought their way through every barricade, every trap the Empire had thrown at them. Now, they stood on the precipice of victory, or annihilation. With the enhanced soldiers neutralized, the rebels pressed forward, pushing through the final layer of defense. The Empire's elite forces, once thought to be the invincible backbone of the Emperor's power, had been shattered, but the command center was still heavily fortified. The station's outer walls shimmered with an impenetrable energy shield, and squads of regular Imperial soldiers stood guard, determined to stop them at all costs. Aiden stood at the front of his squad, breathing heavily, sweat dripping down his face as the gravity of their mission settled over him. They were mere steps away from the heart of the Empire's control, but they had no illusions. This wouldn't be easy. "We've come this far," Aiden said, his voice low but steady. "We take this command center, and the Empire's grip on the galaxy will be broken. We end this today." Sarah, always at his side, nodded. "We've lost too much to back down now. The future of the galaxy is at stake." "Agreed," Aiden replied, turning his gaze to the station ahead. "Let's finish this." The rebels surged forward, charging the last line of Imperial defense. They fought through the hail of blaster fire, pressing onward with unyielding determination. Aiden's hand never wavered on his blaster as he picked off enemy soldiers, leading the charge with the same cold precision that had made him a legend. He was the last human warrior, and this was his moment. But as they reached the outer gates, the situation shifted. The energy shield surrounding the command center flickered, then crackled with intense force. It was no ordinary defense system. It was powered by a massive generator deep inside the facility, a central core that kept the entire station safe from outside threats. "We need to disable the shield generator," Aiden shouted over the sounds of the battle. "Sarah, Tyke, take your teams and head for the generator. The rest of us will hold the line." Without hesitation, Sarah and Tyke broke off, leading their squads toward the station's interior. Aiden watched them go, his heart pounding in his chest. They had come too far to fail now. If they could get to that generator, they could bring down the shield and give the rest of the rebellion a chance to break into the command center. But the moment they began to split off, a new threat emerged. The station's central gates creaked open, and from the shadows emerged the last of the Emperor's guards. Dressed in black armor, the elite royal guards moved with the fluid grace of predators, their energy blades glowing ominously. Aiden's instincts flared. These were no ordinary soldiers. They were the Emperor's personal guard, genetically engineered and trained to be the most lethal warriors in the galaxy. If anyone could stop them, it would be these guards. Aiden, get down. Sarah yelled as she and her team dove for cover. The Royal Guards unleashed a barrage of energy blasts, forcing the rebels to scatter. Aiden's blaster fired in quick bursts, but the guards' armor seemed impervious. Each strike bounced off their shields, leaving nothing but scorched marks. "We need to break through," Aiden shouted, his voice filled with urgency. The mission was at a tipping point. If they didn't take the command center now, everything they had fought for would be in vain. Without hesitation, Aiden activated his wrist communicator. "Sarah, Tyke, how are you doing with the generator?" "We're close." Sarah's voice crackled through the comm. "Just a few more seconds." Aiden's heart raced as he looked at the advancing guards. There was no more time to waste. He had to hold them off long enough for his team to disable the generator. Taking a deep breath, he took off toward the guards, firing with precision. His every movement was calculated, dancing between the energy blasts, closing the gap between him and the enemy soldiers. Then he did something unexpected. With a swift move, he slid behind cover, pulling a thermal detonator from his belt. Holding his breath, he tossed it into the center of the group of guards. The explosion sent shockwaves through the area, knocking several of the guards off balance. "Now," Aiden shouted. The remaining guards stumbled back, and the rebels, seizing the opportunity, surged forward with everything they had. Blaster fire filled the air as the last of the Royal Guards were taken down, one by one. Aiden didn't stop. He couldn't afford to. The fate of the galaxy rested on this final push. From his comm, Sarah's voice came through, clear and filled with relief. "The generator's down. The shield's gone. It's all yours, Aiden." With a single nod, Aiden turned toward the now unprotected command center. It was vulnerable. Their moment had arrived. He led his rebels in a final sprint toward the station's main entrance, blasting away the last line of defense. The gates opened with a screech, revealing the heart of the Empire's command. Inside, the last remnants of Imperial forces stood waiting. But Aiden knew that their time had come to an end. This was the moment the galaxy had been waiting for. And the last human warrior was about to bring down the Empire for good. The gates of the Imperial Command Center were no longer a barrier. Aiden Stark and his rebels stood at the threshold of the most crucial victory of their lives. The last human warrior, along with the few who dared to follow him, had pierced the heart of the Empire itself. But as Aiden led his team inside, the atmosphere was thick with tension. There was no turning back now. The fate of the galaxy rested on this final confrontation. Inside, the command center was a sprawling, sterile expanse of high-tech consoles and holographic displays. The air hummed with the remnants of Imperial authority, and at its center stood Emperor Varric, once an untouchable ruler, now facing the last hope of the galaxy. He stood tall, his dark cloak swirling as if it could command the very shadows. His pale eyes gleamed with a mixture of contempt and cold calculation. "You came all this way, Stark," the Emperor's voice echoed through the command center, deep and measured. "But you are too late. The Empire cannot be brought down by a handful of rebels, no matter how brave or foolish. You think your small victories mean something. You are nothing compared to the power I wield." Aiden's eyes narrowed. He had faced the Empire's soldiers, their elite guards, and countless other threats. But this was personal. His voice, filled with cold certainty, rang out across the chamber. "The Empire is dying, Varric. You've just been too blind to see it. And you won't stop us." Varric's lips twisted into a cruel smile. "You overestimate your importance. This galaxy is mine, and it always will be." As he spoke, the lights in the command center flickered. The screens around them came alive with Imperial forces scrambling to protect their Emperor, reinforcing the command center's defenses. But they were too late. The shield generator had been disabled, and the heart of the Empire was now vulnerable. Aiden's team moved into position. The final battle was upon them. Sarah and Tyke positioned themselves by the walls, covering the entrances. Aiden, leading the charge, approached the throne-like platform where the Emperor stood. The weight of the moment pressed down on him. "Do you know why you'll lose, Varric?" Aiden called out, his voice unwavering. "It's not because I'm stronger or smarter. It's because the people you've oppressed, the lives you've destroyed, they've all come together. And now, they're fighting back. We're the beginning of the end." Varric's sneer faltered for just a moment, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. But his confidence returned quickly. With a wave of his hand, he activated a control on his console, and suddenly, a group of advanced Imperial soldiers poured into the room, their blasters raised and aimed at Aiden's team. But the rebels were ready. They fought with all their might, and with every shot, they closed in on the Emperor. Aiden's mind was laser-focused on his objective. He pushed forward, every step calculated, as the clash of blaster fire reverberated throughout the chamber. The air was thick with tension, but Aiden didn't flinch. He had come too far to be stopped now. "Don't you see?" Aiden shouted, as he pushed forward, his blaster steady. "Your empire is a house of cards, and all it takes is a single push to bring it all down. It's over." The Emperor's eyes glinted with rage as he stepped back, raising his hand to command the last of his defenses. But before he could react, Aiden and his team converged on him, overpowering the last of the Imperial soldiers. Varric, surrounded, took a step back, but there was no escape. "Your reign is finished, Varric," Aiden said, locking eyes with the Emperor. "Your empire ends here, and so does your tyranny." With a sharp motion, Aiden signaled to his team, and the Emperor was restrained. There was no more grand speech, no more false bravado. In the face of defeat, the Emperor's earlier confidence evaporated, replaced by the cold, hard reality of his impending downfall. Outside, the last remaining Imperial fleet was already in retreat. Rebel forces, buoyed by the fall of the command center, surged across the galaxy, taking control of key systems and liberating entire star systems from Imperial rule. The rebellion, once an idea fueled by whispers in the dark, had become an unstoppable force. And in that moment, standing in the very heart of the Empire, Aiden Stark knew that everything had changed. The Empire had crumbled, its core shattered by the actions of a single human warrior. With the Emperor's fall, the galaxy began its slow, painful recovery. Aiden had been the spark, but it was the collective will of countless species, of millions of souls, that had turned the tide. The Empire would no longer cast its shadow over the galaxy. As Aiden and his team stood victorious, looking at the fallen Emperor, he knew their fight was far from over. There would be challenges, there would be struggles, but for the first time in centuries, the galaxy had hope. The future was no longer the Empire's to dictate, and the last human warrior had changed the galaxy forever.